Jake Morrison had been salvaging space junk for 15 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the void could throw at him. His modified hauler, the Scrap Runner, drifted through the Kepler Belt's outer rim where most salvagers feared to venture. The radiation levels here would cook an unshielded human in minutes. But Jake had learned to read the cosmic weather patterns like an old fisherman reading ocean currents. Today felt different, though. His sensors kept picking up something that shouldn't exist this far from any known shipping lanes. The signature was massive, metallic, and completely dead to all active scans. Jake's weathered hands moved across his control panel with practiced efficiency, adjusting his approach vector while keeping one eye on the radiation monitor. "Come on, sweetheart," he muttered to his ship, patting the worn armrest of his pilot's seat. "Let's see what treasure the universe left us today." The object resolved on his visual display as he approached, and Jake's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, floating away in the low gravity. What hung before him wasn't human technology. The craft stretched nearly 2 kilometers in length, its surface a seamless blend of organic curves and geometric precision that hurt to look at directly. No human shipyard had ever produced anything like this. Jake had heard stories about alien artifacts, of course. Every salvager had. Most were dismissed as spacer tales told in asteroid belt taverns, but here was proof that humanity wasn't alone in the universe, drifting silent and dark against the starfield. His first instinct was to call it in. Protocol demanded reporting any non-human technology to the Colonial Authority. But protocol also meant paperwork, investigations, and ultimately losing claim to what might be the greatest salvage find in human history. Jake had 3 kids back on Titan Station, and their education fund could use this kind of windfall. The alien ship showed no signs of power, no energy signatures, no response to his standard hailing frequencies. As far as his instruments could tell, it was completely dead. Jake spent 2 hours circling the massive vessel, taking detailed scans and looking for any sign of danger. His radiation detectors remained silent except for the usual background noise. Finding an airlock took another hour. The alien equivalent wasn't immediately obvious, but Jake had developed an eye for design logic over his years of cracking open derelict ships. Near what he assumed was the stern, a section of hull showed subtle geometric patterns that suggested an entrance. Jake suited up in his heavy EVA gear, the kind designed for extended exposure to the kind of radiation that soaked this region of space. His suit's AI ran constant diagnostics, monitoring everything from air mixture to joint flexibility. As he stepped into the Scrap Runner's tiny airlock, Jake wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. The journey across the void between his ship and the alien craft took 12 minutes. Jake used magnetic anchor points to pull himself along a safety line, his helmet lights casting eerie shadows across the alien hull as he approached. Up close, the surface seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal frozen in time. When he placed his gloved hand against it, the material felt warm, even through his suit's insulation. The geometric patterns around the assumed airlock were more complex than they'd appeared from his ship. They seemed to respond to his presence, brightening slightly as he traced them with his finger. Jake had opened hundreds of different airlocks in his career, from ancient Earth designs to modern Colonial Authority standard hatches. This one defied everything he knew about engineering. When in doubt, try the universal constant, Jake said to himself, remembering his mentor's words. He pressed his palm flat against the center of the pattern and pushed. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then, the patterns flared with soft blue light, and a section of hull simply vanished, revealing an airlock chamber beyond. Jake's suit sensors immediately detected a pressurized atmosphere on the other side. Though the gas mixture was unlike anything in human databases, Jake hesitated at the threshold. His daughter, Sarah, was starting university next year. His twin boys needed new educational pods for their advanced mathematics program. The bonus from this salvage could change their lives, but stepping into an alien spacecraft felt like crossing a line he might never be able to uncross. The decision was made for him when his suit's proximity alarms started screaming. Jake spun around to see his safety line beginning to drift away from the alien hull. Something had severed it. and his magnetic anchors were losing their grip on the smooth alien surface. In seconds, he would be floating free in space, too far from either ship to make it back. Jake dove through the alien airlock just as his anchors failed completely. He tumbled into the chamber as the hull sealed itself behind him with the same impossible vanishing act. Emergency lights began pulsing around the chamber's perimeter, casting everything in alternating blue and amber. Jake's suit detected the atmosphere cycling, somehow reading his equipment and adjusting the mixture to something he could breathe. "Well," Jake said, his voice echoing inside his helmet, "I guess I'm committed now." Hive. The inner airlock cycled open to reveal a corridor that stretched beyond the reach of his helmet lights. The walls were covered in the same flowing patterns he'd seen outside, but these were active, pulsing with gentle light that seemed to react to his movements. As Jake took his first steps into the alien vessel, the patterns brightened ahead of him while dimming behind, as if the ship was guiding him forward. Jake's suit sensors were going crazy, detecting energy signatures that shouldn't exist according to human physics. The gravity was exactly Earth normal, though his equipment couldn't identify any gravity generators. The temperature was a comfortable 22 degrees Celsius. Everything about the environment suggested the ship was not just functional, but actively maintaining itself for a human visitor. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that took Jake's breath away. The space was easily 3 stories tall, and stretched further than his lights could reach. What dominated his attention, though, were the pods. Thousands of them lined the walls in perfect geometric arrangements, each one the size of a human body. They were transparent, revealing figures inside that looked remarkably human, despite small differences in bone structure and skin coloration. Jake approached the nearest pod carefully, his engineer's mind cataloging every detail. The figure inside was definitely humanoid, but the proportions were slightly off. The limbs were too long, the skull too narrow, the fingers bearing an extra joint. Most disturbing was that the figure looked fresh, as if it had been placed in the pod yesterday, rather than however long this ship had been drifting in space. His suit's scanner detected massive energy readings from the pod array. But the energy signatures were unlike anything in human databases. Jake moved from pod to pod, finding the same scene repeated thousands of times. Each contained a different being, but all were variations on the same basic humanoid template. Some were taller, some shorter. Some had different skin tones or bone structures, but all looked preserved in perfect condition. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform with what could only be a control console. The surface was covered in the same flowing patterns that decorated the walls, but these were brighter, more active. As Jake approached, symbols began forming in the light, shifting and changing as if the system was trying to communicate. Jake had worked with enough alien technology in his salvage career to recognize an interface when he saw one. The patterns were responding to his presence, trying to establish some form of communication. Against his better judgment, Jake reached out and placed his gloved hand on the console surface. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Light erupted from every surface in the chamber, and Jake felt a presence touch his mind. It wasn't painful, but it was utterly alien, vast and ancient, and tinged with desperate urgency. Images flashed through his consciousness too quickly to process, showing star maps, planetary surfaces, and scenes of cosmic destruction on a scale that defied comprehension. When the light faded, Jake found himself on his knees, his suit's medical monitors flashing warnings about elevated heart rate and stress hormones. But he understood now, with crystal clarity that bypassed normal learning. The beings in the pods weren't dead. They were refugees, stored in some form of suspended animation, while their ship searched for a safe haven. They were the last survivors of their species, fleeing something so terrible that they'd preserved themselves in hope of finding sanctuary among the stars. And now, through his touch, Jake had awakened their ship's final protocol. Throughout the chamber, the pods were beginning to glow brighter. Status displays that Jake somehow understood showed systems coming online after eons of dormancy. The hibernation cycles were ending, and soon thousands of alien refugees would wake to find a lone human salvager as their first contact with a new species. Jake's hands shook as he backed away from the console. His small salvage operation had just become the most important first contact in human history. But more than that, The images the alien mind had shared with him told a story of cosmic horror that chilled him to his core. These refugees weren't just fleeing war or disaster. They were running from something that consumed entire civilizations. Something that had already destroyed hundreds of worlds. And according to the star maps now burning in his memory, that something had just detected the activation of this ship's systems. It was coming to finish what it had started. And Earth lay directly in its path. Jake triggered his suit's emergency beacon, sending a priority signal back to his ship. Whatever happened next, he was no longer just a salvager, looking for a good score. He was humanity's first ambassador to an alien species, and possibly the only person who could warn Earth about the terror that was racing toward them through the void. As the first of the pods began to cycle open, Jake Morrison realized that his quiet life of salvaging space junk had just ended forever. What emerged from this moment would either save two species or doom them both to extinction. The universe had just become a much larger and more dangerous place, and a simple human salvager stood at the center of it all. The first alien to emerge from the pods was tall and graceful, with silver-blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the chamber's shifting light. Jake watched in fascination as the being's eyes opened, revealing irises that held depths like looking into a clear mountain lake. Those eyes found Jake immediately, and he felt another gentle touch against his mind, this one cautious and questioning. Jake raised his hands slowly, palms outward, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The being stepped out of its pod with fluid movements, studying Jake with obvious curiosity. When it spoke, Jake's translation implant somehow understood the meaning, though the voice was like music played through crystalline chimes. "You are not of our kind, yet you awakened us," the being said. "I am Kes Valdris, guardian of the last archive. Your species. You are very young, yes? We can sense the vibrance of new growth in your thoughts. My name is Jake Morrison," he replied, surprised that his words seemed to translate automatically. "I'm human. I found your ship drifting in space, and accidentally activated something when I touched your control system." More pods were opening throughout the chamber, their occupants emerging with the same fluid grace as Kes. Jake counted at least 50 awakening in the immediate area, but the chamber stretched far beyond what he could see. There could be thousands more throughout the ship. Kes moved to the central console, their long fingers dancing across the light patterns with practiced ease. The emergency awakening protocol was triggered. This only activates when the archive detects immediate threat to our mission. The alien's expression grew troubled. "But we are far from any known star system. What danger did you sense, young one?" "I didn't sense any danger," Jake said, then paused as he remembered the images that had flooded his mind when he first touched the console. "Wait. There was something. When I made contact with your system, I saw things, star maps, destruction, something terrible hunting through space." The other aliens had gathered around the console now, their musical voices creating a harmony that somehow conveyed urgency and fear. Kes worked frantically at the controls, and Jake watched displays appear in the air showing star charts and sensor readings that meant nothing to him. "By the eternal light," Kes breathed. "The Shadow Fleet. They found us somehow. Our stealth systems should have kept us hidden for millennia. But something has broken our concealment." Jake felt a chill run through him. Shadow Fleet? Another alien, this one with darker skin and intricate patterns tattooed along their arms, stepped forward. "I am Nerathes, military coordinator of the archive. The Shadow Fleet is what destroyed our homeworld and 17 of our colonies. They are not merely conquerors, they are devourers. They consume entire civilizations, absorbing their knowledge, technology, and life force to fuel their endless expansion." "How long do we have?" Jake asked, though he was afraid of the answer. Kes's fingers moved across the display, calculating trajectories and timing. "Based on their current vector and speed, they will reach this position in 37 of your Earth hours. But that is not our greatest concern." Jake didn't like the sound of that. "What do you mean?" Nira's expression was grim. "The archive contains the collected knowledge of 43 extinct civilizations. Everything they knew about science, technology, culture, and warfare. If the Shadow Fleet captures this ship, they will gain access to technologies that could make them unstoppable. But more than that. She paused, looking directly at Jake. Your ship's transponder is actively broadcasting. The Shadow Fleet will follow your trail directly to your homeworld. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. His simple salvage beacon, designed to help rescue teams find him if something went wrong, was now a breadcrumb trail leading directly to Earth. Can we shut it down? Change the signal somehow? It may already be too late, Kess said, studying the sensor displays. But perhaps. You said you are a salvager. Yes? You understand ship systems and technology? I've been working on spacecraft for 15 years. I can fix most anything that flies. Kess and Nira exchanged a look that conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. Finally, Kess spoke. There may be a solution, but it will require combining our knowledge with your practical experience. The archive was designed to be mobile, but our power systems were damaged when we fled the destruction of our last sanctuary. We have been drifting, using minimal energy to maintain the preservation systems. Jake was already seeing the problem. You need to get out of here, but you don't have enough power to reach a safe distance. Precisely. However, your vessel's power systems, primitive though they may be, could provide the energy burst we need to activate our quantum displacement drives. But the integration would require someone who understands both technologies. Jake looked around the chamber, taking in the impossible technology surrounding him. You want me to jury-rig a connection between human tech and alien systems that are thousands of years more advanced than anything we've built. Can it be done? Nira asked. Jake thought about his daughter Sarah, dreaming of becoming an astrophysicist. He thought about his twin boys, whose mathematical minds were already surpassing his own understanding. He thought about Earth, and billions of people who had no idea that their world had just been marked for consumption by something unimaginably terrible. I'll need to see your power distribution systems, Jake said, and I'll need help understanding how your technology interfaces with external power sources. Over the next several hours, Jake worked alongside Kess and a team of archive engineers to understand the alien ship's systems. What he found amazed and humbled him. Human technology was like a stone axe compared to the archive systems, but the fundamental principles were the same. Energy still needed to flow along predictable paths. Systems still needed control interfaces and safety protocols. The challenge was bridging the gap between technologies separated by millennia of development. Jake's solution was elegantly simple. Instead of trying to make the systems communicate directly, he would use his ship as an intermediary. The scraprunner's power core could be overloaded to produce the massive energy burst the archive needed, while his ship's systems would regulate the flow to prevent catastrophic feedback. This is brilliant, Kess said as Jake explained his plan. Using your vessel as both power source and interface buffer. It should work. But my ship won't survive the process, Jake finished. The power overload will fry every system I have. Even if we pull this off, I'll be stranded here. Nira placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. We would not ask this sacrifice of you, young human. There must be another way, Jake shook his head. You said it yourself. If the Shadow Fleet gets the archive's knowledge, they become unstoppable. And they're already heading for Earth because of my beacon. This might be our only chance to save both our species. What Jake didn't tell them was that he'd already made his choice. As soon as he'd seen the images of the Shadow Fleet's destruction, he'd known what had to be done. Some things were more important than one person's life, even his own. The modification work took 12 hours of careful, precise labor. Jake had to physically connect his ship's power systems to the archive, using every meter of cable he had aboard. Kess and the other aliens worked to modify their quantum drives to accept the crude but powerful energy surge from human technology. As they worked, more of the archive's survivors emerged from their pods. Jake learned that they represented the last refugees from dozens of worlds, all fleeing the same inexorable threat. Scientists, artists, teachers, farmers, all the knowledge and culture of extinct civilizations, preserved in the hope that somewhere, somehow, they could find a new home and continue their legacy. Why did you save all this? Jake asked Kess during a brief break. You could have built faster ships, better weapons. Why preserve culture and knowledge instead of focusing on survival? Kess's expression was thoughtful. Because survival without purpose is not truly living. The Shadow Fleet destroys not just lives, but the meaning of those lives. They leave nothing behind, not even memory. We chose to carry forward what made our peoples beautiful and unique. It seemed more important than running faster. Jake understood. It wasn't just about saving lives, it was about saving what made life worth living. With 3 hours remaining before the Shadow Fleet's estimated arrival, Jake made the final connections. The scrap runner's power core hummed with barely contained energy, its safety systems screaming warnings about imminent overload. Jake stood at his ship's control panel, his finger hovering over the activation switch. Are you certain this will work? He asked Kess over the communication link. The calculations are sound. Kess replied. Your energy surge will provide exactly what we need to engage our displacement drives. We will be able to jump far enough to escape detection. And the signal trail to Earth? We have prepared a false trail that will lead the Shadow Fleet to an empty system. By the time they realize the deception, we will be long gone, and your world will be safe. Jake took a deep breath, thinking one last time about his children. Sarah would understand why he'd made this choice. The boys would grow up proud of their father's sacrifice. And Earth would continue spinning peacefully in space, never knowing how close it had come to annihilation. Tell me something, Jake said. When you find a new home, what will you do with all that knowledge you've preserved? We will teach, Kess said simply. We will share what we know and help new civilizations grow strong enough to defend themselves when the darkness comes. Perhaps one day, your people and ours will meet again under better circumstances. Jake smiled inside his helmet. I'd like that. He pressed the activation switch. The scrap runner's power core overloaded in a cascade of brilliance that lit up the void for thousands of kilometers. Energy poured into the archive's systems with the fury of a contained star, and Jake felt his ship dying around him as every circuit fried and every system failed. But the archive's quantum drives responded perfectly. Space twisted around the massive alien ship, and in a flash of impossible light, it vanished into the space between dimensions, carrying the last hope of 43 civilizations to safety among the distant stars. Jake's ship went dark and quiet, drifting dead in the void. But through his helmet's visor, he could see the Shadow Fleet's detection probes arriving at the coordinates of Kess's false trail, light years away from Earth. The deception had worked. As Jake activated his emergency beacon and settled in to wait for rescue, he smiled. Somewhere in the universe, the knowledge of countless civilizations lived on, and Earth remained safe, protected by the sacrifice of one determined human salvager who had been in the right place at exactly the right time. The universe was vast and dangerous, but it was also full of hope. Jake Morrison floated in the dark silence of his dead ship for 18 hours before the rescue beacon finally brought help. The Colonial Authority cruiser Meridian found him drifting in the Kepler belt, alive but barely conscious, his suit's life support systems running on backup power. When they pulled him aboard, Jake was delirious from oxygen deprivation and kept talking about aliens and something called the Shadow Fleet. The rescue team's report would have dismissed his ramblings as hallucinations caused by his ordeal, except for one thing. The scrap runner showed clear evidence of massive power overload, far beyond anything its systems should have been capable of producing. The energy signatures detected by the Meridian's sensors were unlike anything in human databases. Captain Elena Vasquez was a veteran of 30 years in space, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. Something about Morrison's story rang true, despite its impossible nature. When she reviewed the sensor logs from the area, she found traces of exotic particles and gravitational distortions that couldn't be explained by known physics. 3 days later, Jake found himself in a sterile debriefing room at Luna Command, facing a panel of officers from Colonial Intelligence. They questioned him for hours, going over every detail of his encounter with the archive. Jake told them everything, holding nothing back. The knowledge of what was coming, what the universe really contained, was too important to keep secret. Admiral Christine Hayes, Director of Colonial Intelligence, listened to his account with growing concern. Mr. 44, Morrison, what you're describing would represent the most significant discovery in human history. Are you absolutely certain about what you experienced? Admiral, I know how it sounds, Jake replied. But I've been working in space long enough to know the difference between reality and hallucination. That ship was real. Those people were real. And the thing they were running from is still out there. Dr. Sarah Chen, the panel's xenobiology expert, leaned forward. You mentioned that their technology could somehow interface with your thoughts. How is that possible? I don't know how it worked, but I know what I experienced. When I touched their control system, I could see their memories, understand their language. It was like their entire culture was built around some form of mental connection. The debriefing continued for 3 days. Jake answered every question they threw at him, submitted to medical examinations, and even underwent experimental brain scans to detect any evidence of alien technology. The tests found subtle changes in his neural pathways, patterns that suggested exposure to advanced quantum fields. But it was the analysis of the particle traces from the scrap runner that finally convinced the panel. The exotic matter residue showed isotope ratios that couldn't exist naturally in this universe. Whatever had happened to Jake Morrison, it involved technology far beyond human understanding. 6 months after his rescue, Jake was living in a small apartment near Luna Command, working as a consultant for Project Deep Look, the classified program established to study his encounter and prepare Earth for the possibility of further contact. His old life as a salvager was over. But his knowledge of the archive had made him the most valuable person in human space. The project had grown rapidly, bringing together the brightest minds from across human civilization. Physicists studied the particle traces, trying to reverse engineer alien technology. Linguists analyzed Jake's descriptions of the archive's mental communication systems. Military strategists planned defensive scenarios against threats like the Shadow Fleet. But it was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a quantum communications researcher, who made the breakthrough that changed everything. Jake, you said the aliens could communicate through thought, she said during one of their regular sessions. What if that wasn't telepathy, in the traditional sense? What if they were using quantum entanglement on a biological level? Jake had learned enough physics over the past months to follow her reasoning. You mean their brains were somehow quantum linked? Exactly. And if that's true, then the changes we've detected in your brain patterns might be more significant than we thought. Elena pulled up a holographic display showing neural scan results. These quantum field fluctuations in your temporal lobe are too regular to be random. They look almost like communication protocols. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. You think I'm still connected to them somehow? Over the following weeks, Elena and her team developed a revolutionary communications array based on Jake's altered neural patterns. If their theory was correct, they could use his quantum-entangled brain cells as a transmission antenna to reach across impossible distances and contact the archive. The first successful transmission came 3 months later. Jake sat in a specially designed chamber, surrounded by quantum field generators. His brainwaves amplified and transmitted across the galaxy. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Kess's musical voice speaking directly into his thoughts. Jake Morrison, we hoped but dared not believe we would hear from you again. Are you well? The reunion was emotional, even across the vast emptiness of space. Jake learned that the archive had successfully established a new sanctuary in a distant galaxy, far from the Shadow Fleet's hunting grounds. More importantly, they had made contact with other refugee populations, gathering survivors from dozens of civilizations into a growing alliance. We have begun the work we preserved ourselves to accomplish, Kess explained during one of their regular communications. Teaching, sharing knowledge, helping young species develop the strength to resist the darkness. Your sacrifice saved more than just our ship, Jake Morrison. It preserved hope itself. But the real revelation came when Kess shared what the archive had learned about humanity through their connection with Jake's mind. Your species is remarkable, Kess said. In our database of 43 civilizations, we have never encountered people who combine such fierce individuality with such willingness to sacrifice for others. Most species tend toward either collective thinking or pure self-interest. Humans seem to balance both in a way that makes you uniquely adaptable. What does that mean? Jake asked. It means you may be the key to finally defeating the Shadow Fleet. The explanation that followed changed humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. The Shadow Fleet wasn't just a conquering army. It was a form of collective consciousness that absorbed other minds into its network. Civilizations fell to it because they couldn't resist the psychological pressure of billions of linked minds working in perfect unity. But humans were different. Their individual consciousness was too strong to be easily absorbed, while their capacity for cooperation meant they could work together without losing their personal identity. In Jake's sacrifice to save the archive, the aliens had seen proof of humanity's unique potential. We propose an alliance, Kess continued. We will share our accumulated knowledge with your species, help you develop the technology and understanding you will need. In exchange, humanity will serve as the foundation for a new kind of resistance against the darkness. The offer was extraordinary. Thousands of years of scientific and technological advancement, freely given, medical knowledge that could extend human lifespans indefinitely, transportation technology that would make the stars easily reachable, agricultural techniques that could support populations beyond imagination. But Admiral Hayes had an important question. What's the catch? There's always a catch with offers like this. Jake relayed the question to Kess, who responded with what might have been alien laughter. The catch, as you put it, is that in accepting our help, humanity will inevitably encounter the Shadow Fleet. They are spreading across this galaxy, consuming everything in their path. Eventually, they will find Earth, whether you are prepared or not. We offer you the chance to meet them as equals rather than victims. The debate that followed consumed the highest levels of human government for months. Some argued that humanity should reject the alien knowledge and hide, hoping the Shadow Fleet would never find Earth. Others insisted that the chance to leap forward thousands of years in technological development was worth any risk. Jake found himself at the center of it all, the living bridge between two species. His simple desire to provide for his children had accidentally initiated humanity's entrance onto the galactic stage. The irony wasn't lost on him. The final decision came after the archive shared a gift that made the choice inevitable. Through their quantum communication link, Kess transmitted the complete historical records of the 43 extinct civilizations. Humanity suddenly had access to the art, literature, music, and philosophy of dozens of unique cultures, an intellectual treasure beyond price. They're all gone, Jake said during the final council meeting. Every single civilization in that database was destroyed by the Shadow Fleet. The only reason we know they ever existed is because Kess and the others risked everything to preserve their memory. Are we really going to turn our backs on the chance to make sure that doesn't happen to us? The vote was unanimous. Over the following years, human civilization transformed at an unprecedented pace. Archive technology revolutionized medicine, engineering, and space travel. New colonies spread across the galaxy as humanity claimed its place among the stars. But more importantly, humans retained their essential humanity even as they gained godlike capabilities. Jake watched it all unfold from his position as humanity's first alien ambassador. His daughter Sarah became Earth's leading expert in archive physics, her mathematical genius amplified by alien knowledge. His twin boys founded a new field called quantum ethics, developing philosophical frameworks for the moral challenges of advanced technology. The Shadow Fleet came, eventually, just as the archive had predicted. But they found humanity ready for them. Not just with superior weapons and technology, but with something the collective consciousness couldn't understand or counter. The stubborn refusal of individual humans to surrender their identity, even in the face of overwhelming force. The war lasted 3 years and ended with humanity's complete victory. But more than that, it ended with the Shadow Fleet's collective consciousness fragmenting back into billions of individual minds, each species reclaiming its independence for the first time in millennia. Jake Morrison, the simple salvager who had just wanted to pay for his kids' education, found himself honored as the father of galactic liberation. Streets were named after him on 100 worlds. His story was taught to children of dozens of species, as an example of how one person's courage could change the universe. But Jake's favorite honor came from the archive itself. In their vast library of preserved cultures, they created a new section dedicated to the human spirit. Not just the history and achievements of his species, but the unique quality that made humans willing to sacrifice everything for strangers they'd never met. Standing on the bridge of the archive ship during the celebration of the Shadow Fleet's defeat, Jake looked out at the stars and thought about the strange chain of events that had brought him here. A routine salvage run had become first contact. A simple desire to provide for his family had become the salvation of countless civilizations. Kess approached him, moving with that familiar fluid grace. "Do you ever regret it, Jake Morrison? The loss of your simple life among the asteroids?" Jake smiled, thinking of his children. Now grown, and leading humanity's expansion into the galaxy. He thought of the billions of lives saved, the cultures preserved, the darkness finally pushed back. "No," he said. "Sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be, even when you don't know it. I was just a salvager looking for scrap metal, but maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needed. Someone too stubborn to know when to quit." Through the viewing port, the stars shined with the light of 1,000,000,000,000 free worlds, each one a testament to what could happen when courage met opportunity in the vast darkness of space. And at the center of it all was the simple truth that sometimes, being human was exactly enough.